Okay guys, welcome to my basic orientation tutorial for Autodesk Maya 2018. So I'm using the student version here, which I've downloaded legally from Autodesk Maya Education. If you are a student or a teacher, you can get a free download. You can see here, I've put my information in, I've downloaded this for free and you can use it. So, a couple of things that's worth pointing out. First of all, if you're one of my students and you're coming to this tutorial, then I recommend you look at the first Unity tutorial first of all, because many of the same movement and view options that work in Unity also work the same way in Maya, and you don't have all of this kind of cluttering stuff to distract. So, the first thing I want to do is talk about all this cluttering stuff up here. At first glance, Maya looks like an incredibly complex program, and it can be. It can do lots and lots of things, but the good news is you're probably never going to want it to do more than 2 or 3 things at any given time. So you can see here this sub-menu set here on the shelf. This is called the shelf. We've got poly modeling. We're going to be doing a little bit of that. If I click on animation, you can see I get different tool options here. If I click on rigging, I get different ones, but we're mostly going to work in modeling and animation today. So also you'll notice up here, I'm using a Mac, the menu is embedded into Maya rather than up at the top of the screen. That's because the menu sets that you have, the options past windows here, these, will change depending on which menu set you click on. So you can see I'm in modeling here and I've got mesh, edit mesh, mesh tools, so on. If I go down to animation, then I get different options, key, playback, visualize, and so on and so forth. We are only going to work today in modeling and we're only going to work in polygons. So it's just these 2 sets here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how you can create basic primitives here, how you can change the shape of those primitives, and how you can find your way around the site itself. So what we're going to do first of all is I'm just going to create a basic primitive sphere. I'm going to create that sphere in the middle there. I'm going to roll towards it with my middle mouse button and roll back. That's zoom in and out. Now, because this is a 3D environment, for 3D modeling and animation, it's important to be able to look around and see behind it and round and so on and so forth. Okay. In order to do that, you hold the Alt key on the keyboard and then you left click on the mouse and you just drag around so you can see what's going on. Now, it is possible to accidentally flip yourself upside down or lose track of which way's front and which way's side. So the easiest way to do that is to use these 3 tools down here, which is the Translate tool, the Rotate tool, and the Scale tool. And these are very similar to what Unity uses as well. I'm going to start with the Translate tool. Translate is a fancy word for move. So there are 3 axes here you can move on like a 3-dimensional graph. Obviously this is the y-axis, this is up. This is the x-axis, this is side to side, and the blue arrow is the z-axis. This is backwards and forwards. And if I click on one arrow at a time and drag, you'll see that I can move that in that axis. Command Z just puts it back exactly where it was. Command Z is undo, just puts it back where it was, undoes the last command. I can slide side to side on the x-axis, Z puts it back, and I can move on the Z-axis here, front and back, forwards and backwards, towards and away from camera. If you ever find yourself modeling something with a face, it's very important to know which way is forwards, because if you then apply any motion scripts to it, it will move, it will default move in the direction that is forward. So if you model the face on the side like this, you're going to have problems. You can always click on an object and find out what its basic orientation is in the world by looking for the Z-axis, which is the front facing. Okay, like that, like so. That's the Translate tool. If I just go down here and enable the attribute editor, you can see a few more things here. This is a little bit like the inspector in Unity. Click on my object. This is my sphere here, P-sphere 1. I can rename this. I'm going to call this my sphere. Oops, no, I'm not, because I can't spell. My sphere. Okay, this is my sphere here. So you can see if I move it on the y-axis, these numbers change. And if I change these numbers back to 0, then it moves back down to 0 on the grid here. The same thing is true here. I can move it 1 centimeter along the x-axis. I can move it 3 centimeters along the z-axis. And the default unit setting in Maya is centimeters. This is different from Unity, where the default setting is meters. So if you want to build something in Maya for use in Unity, it's good to change the settings to meters before you start modeling. So that's the first thing, that's the Translate tool. The Translate tool has a shortcut key on the keyboard, which is W. If you push W, you'll go to the Translate tool. This is the Rotate tool. Rotate tool, the shortcut key for that is E. You can see here if you hover over it, it says E on the screen. So here again I can grab the handles, I can rotate it in this axis or this axis or this axis, and this becomes very important when we're animating things. And again, these numbers move along here, and if I set it to 0, tab 0, tab 0, tab just allows me to move between these boxes, then I can put it back to its original rotation. You can see down here, moving down, we've done translate, we've done rotate. Now we're going to take a look at scale. This is the scale tool. The scale tool allows you to stretch and grow things. So I can stretch it that way, make it like that. I can stretch it that way, make it like that, and suddenly I've made a flying saucer. Or I can stretch it that way, like that. I'm just going to put this back to the way it was. The one thing I can also do with the scale tool is I can grab it from the middle and I can move it in all areas at once. I can expand it or contract it in all areas at once. This is quite useful. The shortcut command for this is R. So that's W, E, and R on the keyboard. Generally speaking, with W, you wouldn't want to grab it in the middle, and I'll show you why. If I start moving it around like this, if I just duplicate, I'm going to do Command D, I'll come back to duplicate later. If I just duplicate this, so now I've got two, I could have one that looks like that, one that looks like that, and I could think that that's positioned directly above it, but when I rotate round, it isn't. I've moved it back in the Z-axis. I've moved it further back. That might not be immediately obvious when you look at it. So generally speaking, it's a good idea to grab by the handles only. Okay, let me show you a few more things that we can do here. So I've already shown you how to find the attribute editor down here that controls lots and lots of things. You can change the name. It's good practice to name your assets as you go along. But for the purposes of this tutorial, you don't have to name every single little thing that we do. So I'm going to move this to one side and I'm going to show you the other primitives. So that was a primitive sphere, and it comes in with all this grid, this net on it. I'll get into that in a second. We've also got a cube. That's just a basic cube that's just got 6 sides and 6 divisions. We've got a cylinder here. We've got a cone here, which I'll move back like this. We've got a torus, which is a ring, like a kind of donut thing here. That's quite useful. And then we've got just a basic flat plane like this. Now, these are the basic primitives. If we take a quick look down here at this plane here, you'll notice it's got these subdivisions. When you're modeling in 3D, the way you keep track of how big your model is, how complex the model is, rather than the physical size, how complex it is through the polygon count. Polygons are effectively the number of triangular faces that fit in an object here. So if I just show you the cube, just push F to frame on it, push F on the keyboard to frame on the cube. It's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sides, like your basic 6-sided dice. Each one of these sides is a square. Each one of these squares can be divided into just 2 triangular faces. So if this has got 6 square faces, it's got 12 triangular faces. That's generally the polygon count of this object. It's got 12 polygons. If you want to keep track of your polygon count, and if you're modeling large models, it's a good idea to do this, you can go up to Display, Heads Up Display, and just check polycount down here. And then you'll see these tries are what we normally count here. So verts, edges, and faces I'll get into in a second. Tries here, those are your polys. And you can see that this cube has got 12 of them. Okay, let's come over here to this. So here's how I'm navigating. If you hold down Alt and you left click and drag, then you can look around. If you hold down Alt and you middle mouse button click and drag, then you can move things around. And you get very quickly able to move objects and manipulate them with a high degree of skill. You can see that this object here has got 760 polygons, 760 triangular faces. That's because it's got all these subdivisions. Why do we need all these subdivisions? Well, in order to answer that question, let's model something that's a little bit more simple. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go to a kind of vaguely overhead view here. I'm going to drag across all those to select them. I'm going to hit the delete key. I'm going to move them out. I'm going to click this. I'm going to frame on it. Now, what I could do is I could click up here. This would then just create another sphere at exactly the same settings of this one, but I don't want to do that. The other way to create a sphere is to go up to Create, Polygons Primitives, not NURBS, we're going to work with polygons today, Polygons Primitives, and then instead of just clicking Sphere here, which will be the same thing as just clicking that there, clicking the sphere thing, Polygons Primitive Sphere, you click a little box next to it. Anything that's got a box next to it, this opens up the options. So I'm going to click the options. You can see here now, I've got these options of what I'm going to create. So the radius, that doesn't matter, I can change that later on. But these axis divisions and height divisions, well, they're quite important. I'm going to take that down to 5 by 5. And again, I'm just moving between the boxes by clicking Tab. And I'm going to click Apply and then Create. So it's actually created one here already for me. It's created 2 now because it did one when I clicked Apply. I'm going to delete that. Let's put these 2 side by side. And let's take a look at them side by side. So instantly you can see that this one is a really detailed sphere. It kind of looks round. It looks pretty close to perfect. This one, well, it doesn't really look like a sphere at all. It's basically a pentagon. It's a 3D pentagon with 5 sides. However, if I click on this object, it's 760 polygons. If I click on this object, it's only 40 polygons. So if you're modeling for something like a game, it's important that you work with smaller polygon counts because you've got to refresh your frame rate 30 times a second. And the more polygons you've got, the more it slows down. That's why you get slowdown on games when you have lots of models on the screen at the same time. What you'll also notice, if I just roll back a second and look at the middle here, if I click Create Sphere now, it will create another one of these horrible 5-sided spheres because those were the last settings that I told it to create in here. So you can change any of the settings in here and it will always create exactly whatever you made last. So obviously if you don't like whatever you made last, you can go in to this menu set here and you can change it. Okay, so there's one last thing to show you in this first tutorial. If you hit the space bar, what it does is it brings up this 4-paneled view here. So this is my main toggled view here. I can kind of rotate around it. I can hold Alt and left click and drag to move around it. These views here are different and they're fixed. I can't rotate around here. You cannot tumble an orthographic view. So this is an overhead view. I can see it's an overhead view because I've got possibility to move in this direction on the x-axis, possibility to move on the z, but I can't see the y arrow. The y arrow is up and down. This one is the front-on view, so I can move it up and down, or I can move it side to side, but I can't move it forwards. And then this one is the side-on view. I can move it forwards and backwards, I can move it up and down, but I can't move it side to side. This can be very useful if you're trying to precision model something or line something up perfectly when we get into rigging. If you want to focus on any one of these panels, simply click on it, and then push the space bar again, and that will become your main panel. If you don't want to do this, or if you accidentally find yourself in this panel, push the space bar, click back on your main view here, and then push the space bar again, and it will put you in here. This has been my first basic orientation tutorial, how to find your way around. In the next tutorial, I'm going to show you 2 different modeling types. Do please hit subscribe for more tutorials. I've been Dr. H on behalf of Octo Media. Thank you very much.